The Edmonton Oilers have had a rough run of form as of late. Are the Edmonton Oilers unlucky, or is this actually who they are? An investigation on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone that's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, where right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. On today's show, we're going to walk through the various stages of processing and investigation. We're going to start with just talking about the last 13 games or so, since the 1st of February through where we were on Monday when they lost to the Sabres. We'll move along to talking specifically about Connor McDavid's minutes and why he is so important to the Oilers' recipe for success. And we'll conclude today's show with giving you my best guess as to what the Oilers are going to do from here. So let's start in the abstract. We all know the last month of run that the Oilers have had is not acceptable. Coming into the season with Stanley Cup aspirations, there's a expectation that as the season goes along, you're going to keep getting better. And you're going to hit roadblocks, you're going to have bumps in the road. Very rarely will you see a team steamroll through the regular season and then eventually win the championship. That happens from time to time, but that's one of the more rare occurrences, especially in hockey where the playoffs are so volatile and we see the most upsets of the four major sports in North America. And adversity is not necessarily bad. We've discussed it a lot during the course of this season. We talked about it a lot in October and November when the Oilers came out of the gate and their penalty kill and their power play were really struggling, weren't really giving them a chance to win games, even though the underlying 5-on-5 numbers were pretty solid. And when you're talking about adversity, it has the ability to bring the best out of you and not to get too grind set influencer on you. Comfort is not necessarily a good thing in a competitive space, because as soon as you get comfortable, you start to lose that competitive instinct. You start to lose that edge. It does start to weigh on you. And sometimes it's not an active thing. Sometimes that lack of instinct, it doesn't manifest the most direct way. Guys aren't going out there and saying, well, I'm comfortable now. I made it. It is human nature that when you get comfortable, you start to let bad habits seep in. And that's really one of the differentiation points between high achievers and the average person. Alabama legend, one of the best coaches in the history of football, Nick Saban, always used to say, I don't want guys who want to be average on my team, because great people don't hang out with average people. And again, that sounds very Instagram grind set influencer mindset. But in the world of professional sports, where you need to find every last bit of competitive edge you can, it's not uncommon to see guys resort to little mind games with themselves. Tom Brady, the greatest winner in football history and one of the best winners in the history of team sports, even at 42 years old, even with 6 Super Bowl rings, was still telling himself nobody believed in him. He was still telling people, well, I was one of the last picks in the draft. Nobody believed in me. I started out as a third-string quarterback. I got benched in college, and I still got here, and I'm here to prove everyone wrong. And I don't think the Oilers need a dramatic mental reset. I think a lot of their issues, and this is not exactly breaking news, you'll hear people say this all the time, winning is the best medicine. All the Oilers got to do is piece together 2-3 wins. Everyone can exhale, everyone can compose themselves, and we can let some of the discourse die down to a degree. It's not going to die down permanently. There's going to be a give and take where, based on the run of form, that's where the conversation goes. Most discourse in sports is driven by reaction. It's reactionary. It's after the game, you think X, or based on the last few games, you think Y. And The Oilers over the last month have really had a hard time in multiple facets of the game. When you compare the numbers from their season-long stats versus just the last 13 games, you get a pretty stark picture and you get a really different idea of the range of potential outcomes. And a lot of it is small sample size. 13 games. You had a 2-week break in the middle there for the Four Nations face-off. You had McDavid come back from that a little bit worn down. You had Ekholm come back from that a little worn down. And because of that, the Oilers afforded themselves a nice bit of leeway. They had a really good run of form, if you'll recall, in December and January. In December, they went 9-4-3. In January, they went 10-3-1. Even in November, they went 8-4-1. So you can afford to go 2-6 in February and 3-2 so far in March if you rattle off 27-win hockey in a 3-month stretch. And there's a lot of time here for the Oilers to start working themselves out of this funk. But make no mistake about it. Over the last 13 games, they've played pretty bad hockey. An .880 save percentage in all situations over the span of those 13 games. 68% on the penalty kill over those 13 games, which would be the worst for the entire league for the whole season. Right now, the last place team in penalty killing for the whole year is Detroit at 69%. The Oilers over the last 13 games have been even worse. The other real conundrum here, if you're the Oilers, your power play has been humming over those 13 games. You're almost at 40% conversion rate, and you are still 5-8 in those 13 games. You would think a team that has a power play flirting with 40% conversion rate would be a dominant offensive team. But the problem, and I'm going to get to it in a second, they've scored 8 5-on-5 goals over the last 5 games. 1.6 5-on-5 goals per game over their last 5 games. That is nowhere near the threshold the Oilers are going to need to hit over the course of a given season. And some of that is just shooting luck over those 13 games, 6.5 shooting percentage. The season-long average is 8.09. That would probably result in about 1 to 1.5 more goals over the course of that 5-game window if the Oilers were to be shooting at their season-long rate. And I know I just threw a lot of numbers at you, but if you're looking for reassurance, some calming voice, a lot of these numbers would indicate that the Oilers are just getting a little bit unlucky. Their goaltending is really dragging down the rest of the team because the 5-on-5 numbers are decent. They've got a decent share of possession. They've got their special teams working reasonably well. The penalty kill definitely needs to tighten up, but that's tied to goaltending. But they need to get their offense going because they are an offense-first team. Even with the addition of Jake Wallman, even with John Klingberg, even with the additions they've made in season, the development of Ty Emberson, the competence of guys like Troy Stetcher, Brett Kulak, Darnell Nurse, etc., the Oilers' defense is not going to be good enough to classify the Oilers as a defense-first team. They need to get scoring. Because once they get to play with a lead, that's where their defense shines, when they can be opportunistic and they can take advantage of teams needing to push for offense. We are going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And when we come back, we're going to talk specifically about Connor McDavid's role over the last 13 games in the Oilers' struggles. And you're going to be very surprised to hear some of these numbers. See you guys on the other side of the break on this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Did you just realize your business needed to hire someone like yesterday? How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs. Put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates fast. We've all been in that spot where our team needs the right hire, like yesterday. The pressure's on, and every day without that right person is a setback. That's exactly when Indeed sponsored jobs come in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. Now, you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed is all you need. Today's show is also brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where'd all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, though. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you can stop managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food, and now I budget smarter, meal prep, and save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers ahead of the ahead of the Oilers showdown with the New Jersey Devils. Happy to report I will be in attendance to see McDavid and co. again. Anytime Connor and the Oilers are in my neck of the woods, I have to make the venture. I have to make the journey. I'm looking forward to wearing my Team North America jersey to a game for the second time. I've had that thing forever, and I've only got to wear it to see the Oilers in person twice now. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing if the Oilers can take advantage of what's in front of them. We talked about it a little bit on Monday's show after the loss to the Sabres, the idea that this road trip was as favorable a reset as you could possibly get. Playing Buffalo, New Jersey, the Islanders, and the Rangers in a short span. All four of these teams have had their defensive woes all season. The Devils missing their best defenseman in Dougie Hamilton. The Rangers missing their best defenseman in Adam Fox. The Sabres at large are a porous defensive team. They give up a lot of chances. Should have been a little bit easier to score than it was for the Oilers on Monday. The Islanders have a hodgepodge of misfit toys on their back end that have made them liable defensively. And part of the conversation about the Oilers' struggles over the last month or so, it would be unfair to not talk about Connor McDavid over that window. And I'm going to preface this segment and this part of the conversation around McDavid. I am not saying that McDavid is playing poorly. I think a lot of this is just luck-based, especially when we talk about shooting percentage and save percentage in his minutes. But the Oilers are built in a way where they are expecting, and we've talked about this on Locked On Oilers, the pyramid of success, the foundation, the base. You need Connor and Leon to dominate their 5-on-5 minutes because you know your bottom six is not play driving. It is not going to create high volumes of sustainable offense. And by and large, the role of your bottom six on a team with this roster construction is going to be to bring the temperature of the game down. It's going to be to control the puck in the offensive zone, try and wear the other team's defense down, and not do anything too crazy because you don't want to have volatility. When you have Connor and Leon out there, you want them to be able to swing the game on their own. And then when they're not out there, you want to try and bring that game down to a slog. You want to play low event hockey so that way the shifts that Connor and Leon do get have more value because there's fewer overall plays in the game that matter. And over the last month and change, where are my notes? Here are my notes. Sorry about that. Over the last month and change, with and without Leon Draisaitl, McDavid's been outscored 5-18 at 5-on-5. And plus minus is not a great stat. I'm not using it from that point of reference. I'm just using it as the Oilers expect to dominate Connor McDavid's minutes. On the season, they have a positive goal differential. But when we're talking about it in terms of this run of games, a lot of it can be explained by the shooting and save percentage. In that window, in McDavid's 237 minutes since February 1st, the Oilers are shooting 3.5%. That is less than half of the Oilers' season-long average. And because of that, the Oilers are not scoring enough. If the Oilers were scoring at the commiserate rate with their team-long shooting percentage, they'd have at least 2 more goals, probably closer to 3. And then the other end of that spectrum is, of course, the goaltending, where they're getting really bad goaltending over the last month. And that's really tanking McDavid's minutes. And you got to think about it in terms of why. And this might sound dumb to some degree, but think about what the Oilers' offense typically looks like when McDavid's out there. Think about the spacing on the ice. Think about where they are. And think about what that does to not only your defenders, but also your goaltender. So in that 237 minutes, the Oilers have an 844 save percentage, less than 850 in Connor McDavid's minutes since the start of February, that game against the Avalanche. And think about how when the Oilers are on offense with Connor out there, that he's typically going to be the face-off dots are lower. He's going to be closer to the net. So what does that do responsibilities-wise? Well, I'm glad you asked. That means the two defenders up at the point are probably going to be responsible for the three forwards going back the other way if there's a change in possession. And this is what creates that pendulum effect where you think about it on Monday night, the play where Tage Thompson scores the eventual game-winning goal that makes the game 3-2. There's a half pass to Evan Bouchard. Bouchard's up at the point on the left side of on the left wall in the offensive zone. The puck handcuffs him a little bit. He doesn't get a clean puck touch, so it skips over him. He turns all the way around and he starts trying to win a foot race against Tage Thompson. Tage Thompson has an advantage there. He's bigger, he's faster. He wins the foot race, he gets around Bouchard, and he scores. And that's an example of the peril of the way McDavid and co play. And when it's not working, the way they like to play is dangerous and it's volatile. And those cross-seam passes and those no-look passes, when they're not on the tape and they're getting intercepted and they're going the other way, that puts your goalie in a disadvantageous position. Of course, all of this goes without saying. If your goalie has an 844 save percentage in any context, and it's a 10-game sample, Stuart Skinner has not started all 10 of those games. Obviously, some of that is Calvin Pickard as well. But two goalies, 844 even strength save percentage in 237 McDavid minutes since the start of February. That is what you would expect if you were playing an AHL goalie at the NHL level at 5-on-5. If you put an average AHL goalie in net, you would expect about an 845, 850 save percentage. There's a strong difference between the two leagues. There's a reason some guys peter out at that level below. That's not a knock on them. It's the best league in the world for a reason. And the Oilers need a little bit of both to start going their way. You know, they hit 4 posts Monday against Buffalo. They need some of those pucks to go in the net. They also need Skinner and Pickard to make a couple saves. That would help that would help immensely if the Oilers could get one big save to just everybody exhale, to stop walking on eggshells. You see the prices of eggs right now. Stop walking on eggshells. It's too expensive for everybody. We are going to take one more break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, I'm going to give you my parting thoughts as to why I think this is more likely than not just a bad run of bad luck as opposed to a fatal flaw. I will see you guys in a second on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderellas and who's going to win the whole thing. I'm personally a favorites guy. I don't watch a lot of college basketball, so I don't have the time to do extensive research. I mean, they're the favorites for the reason, right? FanDuel makes it easy to pick them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid out instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers. Programming note, my goal is to have Friday's episode for you as soon as I get home from the Devils game. If the logistics make that too challenging, where I don't get home until ridiculously late, and it's just not feasibly possible to record an episode, obviously first thing in the morning, I'll get that out to you guys as soon as I can. But my programming plan is to have a game recap episode for you on Friday morning, so it can accompany you on your way to work, on your way to school, or if you're a sicko like me, working out first thing in the morning. So I do not think the Oilers are as bad as they've played in the last month. I think, like I've said more than once over the course of the last few weeks, This is the worst possible scenario. This is the lowest end of the range of outcomes where the goaltending has entirely capitulated and it sank the team because, like we've established, this team is built around dominating their 5-on-5 minutes with their two superstar players, and everything else flows off of that. So if Connor and Leon aren't chipping in 1.5, 2 points a night combined, and you're only scoring 1.4 goals per game at 5-on-5, and your penalty kill is killing off less than 70% of penalties, the math gets really difficult for you really fast. Most nights, you're going to be able to win in the NHL with 4 goals. If you score 4 goals, more often than not, you're going to take home the W, and you're going to feel reasonably good about that as well. Now, there are nights where it's going to take more. Your defense has a bad night. Your goalie has a bad night. Sometimes you might need to score 5 or 6 or 7, but more often than not, 4 is your magic number. When you have a power play as good as the Oilers, you would say every other game, probably every other game, you're good for a power play goal. So if that's your math and you need 3 more, how can we best get to 3 more goals? So I'm glad you asked. Number 1, we need to separate Connor and Leon, and we need to get Connor going. And Connor is due for a nuclear heater. He's having a solid season. This is not a referendum or an indictment on Connor McDavid's 2024, 2025. He's not having a bad year by any stretch. He's got 58 points in 58 games. He's missed a few because of injury and suspension, but he's a point-per-game player. The expectation is that McDavid's going to finish with 110 points at minimum any given season. So he's got a bit of work to do if he's going to get there. And if anybody is capable of a 35-point and 18-game heater, it's the best player in the world. And it helps a lot that Leon Draisaitl is leading the league in goals. Him and McKinnon have been going back and forth on the league lead in points. But for the Oilers to get where they want to go, they're going to need McDavid to supernova at some point in the next week or so to really kind of rise the tide of all boats. And that's really the benefit and the curse of having the superstar player, because you expect them to make everyone else around them better. And when Connor's having a rough time the way he has over the last month, where they have a negative 13 goal differential in his 5-on-5 minutes, if the best player in the world has a negative 13 goal differential in a game window, something is fundamentally wrong there. Some of that is on him. The shooting hasn't been where it's needed to be. Some of that is Zach Hyman regressing. Some of that is the Nugent-Hopkins spot regressing and swinging between a few different candidates. It's Leon and him getting a little bit too strung out offensively and getting burned going back the other way defensively. There are layers to this conversation. I think more than anything, the Oilers got to get their offense going because everything else stems from that. While I like the Jake Walman addition, he's not a shutdown guy. He's not Jacob Slavin. He's not Gus Forsling. I think the defense will fundamentally play better if the Oilers can score more, because the responsibility will dissipate and the margin for error will increase. Now, you don't want to abuse that margin for error. You don't want to end up in a bunch of 5-4, 6-5 games. In an ideal world, you want to put Connor and Leon in a situation where they can thrive. And for me, that starts with getting to their game. And they've scored first in a handful of these games, and they've let the other team score first in a handful of these games. So it's not necessarily can we score first. It's can we get to our game and establish flow? Can we play how we want to play and control play? Can we make the other team uncomfortable? And can we buy ourselves time? Because right now, every single one of these Oiler games feels like waiting for a black cloud, and it feels like it's always about to rain. You look out the window and the sky is dark. It's not raining yet, but the rain is coming, and Skinner lets in a stinker, or Bouchard gets beat off the rush, or there's a neutral zone turnover that results in a good scoring chance against. And it is really difficult when everybody's in their own head about what they need to be doing, and confidence is so essential as a professional athlete. And you can tell by watching the Oilers as of late that it's not where it needs to be right now. There's a lot of indecisiveness. The play looks slow. And I made this comparison. I made this point a few weeks ago. But if I, watching the game at home on TV with the input delay of TV and the delay of the broadcast of the TV, can watch a player look up and make one or two reads, decide what to do, and then pass it, they're being too slow. They're being too indecisive. When the Oilers are at their best, it is instinctual, it is habitual. The puck goes where it needs to go, it creates a scoring chance, and the Oilers control the flow of the game. And that's not exactly unique to the Oilers. Teams are at their best when they have a majority of possession, when they're making the other team play active defense, putting defenders in conflict, making them make decisions. But as of late, the Oilers are having a hard time. 2 goals against the Sabres, who are an actively bad team, the worst team in the Eastern Conference. It sounds a little ridiculous to say that's unacceptable, but it kind of is unacceptable if you have Stanley Cup aspirations that you can't score more than 2 goals against the Buffalo Sabres. And yeah, Skinner needs to make the one save, but he's also not in a position where he's feeling good about his game. He's not in a position where he's expected to do a lion's share, a majority of the work. And you might roll your eyes at that and say, well, he's got to be better. Yeah, he does. I have a lot better chance of convincing you that Connor McDavid is going to go on a 35-point and 18-game heater than I do telling you that Stuart Skinner is going to be a 9-10 goalie down the backstretch of the season. That's just a probability. More likely than not, Connor probably goes a little crazy at some point over the next few weeks, and that's more than enough to mitigate the Oilers' defensive and goaltending issues. I think that's a whole lot more likely than the alternative, which it would take to turn around the team's run of recent form. But I do think that will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you to everyone who made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. If you could be so kind, please go check out Locked On NHL for your second listen, covering all the biggest stories from across the NHL. I will talk to you guys tomorrow after the game against the Devils, which hopefully the Oilers can start scoring some goals. See you guys then. Until then, let's go Oilers.